Martin, here we are, verging on Christmas.
I find preaching at Christmas and at Easter, in fact, the hardest times to preach. And I always have. So it's not just about, preaching to a congregation in the cathedral or the prisons where I'll go to on Sunday. But as a parish priest, I found it hard to what actually is going to what's the good news here for people this year at this point? And I suppose, I started by thinking about what I was going to say in a little sort of catalogue of what a really challenging year this has been.
There's a long list, isn't there?
There's a long list, and then I realised it's not going to be helpful to recite a long list of things that have been challenging and difficult and increasingly difficult, over which I think all hangs the war in Ukraine. But then had a kind of little flash, which I'm not quite sure what to do with yet, that it was on Christmas Day last year at just after noon GMT, that a rocket was launched from French Guiana, which sent the James Webb Telescope into space, which is now orbiting 1 million miles from Earth, I think, orbiting around the sun. And I don't know whether you remember, but around July, it started to transmit pictures. And these incredible pictures of not quite the origins of the universe, but taking pictures of the sort of nursery where galaxies and stars and planets are formed, and then pictures of galaxies which, according to the time it's taken for the light to reach the telescope, would have been just 350 million years old, as it were, after the Big Bang. So
older than anything we've ever seen.
Possibly. There's a star that's meant to be older than that, but it's probably all to do with the fact that you can't really estimate that precisely. But we're talking, is it 13.7 billion years? Anyway, that sort of hooked me into, because I've got the gospel I'm preaching on is John chapter 1, the first 14 verses, and that hooked me into the in the beginning, and a sense that, of course, John is riffing on Genesis 1, and the great sort of change he makes in narrating creation is that it suddenly becomes not just God alone, as it were, but it is God and the Word who is God. And there is this, so immediately opens up this sense that creation is the fruit of divine love, that it is born of that love between God and the Word, God and the Son, and that we first of all, we participate in creation, which is that act of love, and then that Jesus, as it were, continues as the creator. So we are caught up in this continuing process of creation. So that then kind of landed me in. Sorry, you're getting me thinking through my raw thoughts.
Yeah,
here.
No. Carry on.
Landed me in to thinking. So what we have in the birth of Jesus is this is this focus on the one who is the agent of creation, who is becoming the agent of our recreation. In the course of that, showing us what it means to have the light of life in us, and the light of life, whose life is the light of all. That light is in everyone. So there's an ethical consequence to this, which is of our being created and continuing to be created and recreated. And that ethical consequence is the way in which we regard one another. And we are to see one another, whether they are refugees or whether they are neighbours or whether they are indeed in the situation we're in, whether they are Russians or Ukrainians or whoever, to regard everyone as bearing that light, which is the gift that comes from the incarnation. So I, that's where I'm now. Of course, turning all that into a sermon, it's going to be an interesting exercise. But your reflections.
So I
meaningful grunts.
So I too have John 1:1-14. And I'm thinking about Irenaeus. In his measureless love, God became what we are in order that we could become what he is. So it's his kind of like strap line for incarnation. And I was thinking, okay, so how does that relate to John 1:1-14? And it's packed with themes, John 1:1-14. So they're hopeless to try and cover it all. So you just have to pick something out of there. So the one I've alighted on is how those who trusted in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of flesh, nor of the will of humankind, but of God. So he became what we are in order that we could become what he is. And that involves in part us being children, beloved children of God. Okay, and that's to realize that identity. And I've forgotten, I was reading James Bryan Smith the other day. He said there are 3 reasons why we fail to appropriate that we are beloved children of God, he reckoned. First was graceless religion. In other words, this idea that God's a bit hacked off with us or folded arms and in need of being impressed with us. And it's a big deal, our image of God that we carry around with us. Secondly, our upbringing and how, the danger has always been that, loving parents end up wanting to kind of like improve their children for the sake of the children, but you then associate love with kind of like, I needed to do better there. And, somehow it's to do with my performance and getting better. And what was the third one? The third one was our cultural norms as well. How whether we are desirable or lovable has something to do with how we look, how well we've done, or some other involvement of achievement in our life. He said, there is a reason why John's Gospel, of all the books of the New Testament, contains the word beloved more than any other. And how, in the New Testament, it occurs 47 times that we are beloved. And he said it's interesting that when Paul is writing to the Corinthians, where there are about 11 major problems with that church, he nevertheless refers to them as the beloved. And they're beloved children of God. And why? Because that's their identity. So live out of that identity. So, as you say, it has ethical implications, not least the fraternal relocation of one another, or the sororal relocation of one another, but also to live out of that identity is to be and do differently. And what we see in Jesus, one of the things that Jesus does for us that we can't do for ourselves, is he lives out of that sonship. At every critical public event in his life, he comes back to that, at his baptism. This is my son, my beloved, in whom I'm well pleased. On the Mount of Transfiguration, this is my son, my beloved, listen to him. Even in the Garden of Gethsemane, there's coming back to this checking out of his original identity. So one of the things that Christmas is about, it seems to me, is the good news of realizing ourselves to be God's beloved children, and realizing that Jesus does for us what we can't do, in part by actually living out of that identity and inviting us to live with him into that identity.
Yeah. So I, just thinking about what I was I'm struggling to say. I think there is something about, there's a whole kind of theme of series of beginnings that we're looking at here, but every Christmas is beginning again to live out of that identity, to be reminded what it is, what the incarnation means for us as human beings, and as those who are called into the fellowship of the body of Christ, and how we understand ourselves, how we understand one another, and how we understand everyone.
Yeah, and there's something about Christmas being repeated, which is really important, because it's not as if it's good news in the sense that it's original and newly new, but we need to appropriate the good news continually in new ways, because we continually fall away from this sense of identity. By Boxing Day, we've forgotten who we are again. We need continually to be reminded of this, as Jesus patterned in his own life and ministry.